More Black women live in states that will ban abortion, and those living in southern states with the most restrictive laws will bear the brunt.
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
The reversal of Roe v. Wade is expected to have a disproportionate impact on Black women and other women of color, groups who have typically always faced overwhelming costs and logistical obstacles in obtaining reproductive health care.
What I'm saying is this here. When I listen to Republicans talk about being pro-life, what I want to know is where their pro-life stances when it comes to Head Start. Right. Where their pro-life stances when it comes to prenatal care. Right. Where their pro-life stances when you have Black women who have a high rate of dying in childbirth. Where are your pro-life policies when it comes to Black children?
On June 22nd, 2022, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, a Supreme Court ruling that protected your right to privacy. That right to privacy is what made it possible for your choice to utilize abortion access. A lot of the responses and rage to that ruling being overturned went to really weird places. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Hey, my name is Queen and welcome to the Mix Vixen channel. Hey boo, if you are new here and if you're not new here, thanks for coming through again. I appreciate you. Today's topic will be my personal response to a lot of the chatter that came out of the Roe versus Wade ruling. This is a pro-abortion space, so we're not going to talk about whether or not abortion should be happening or should not be happening because, like I said, I'm pro-abortion. But what I did want to examine with this video is some of the conversation that fell out during that time. A lot of y'all got really transphobic and Christian-centric and misogynist. And I understand that, you were angry and you were mad, but none of that was an excuse. So I figured that I pulled all of the feelings that I had during that time. Well, not a year yet, but almost a year since that ruling dropped. And I thought that it would make sense for me to put those thoughts out. I'm seeing more legislation and more talks of restrictions for abortion access and also other reproductive right restrictions that are trying to be enforced currently in the country. But before we do all of that, let's get into today's sponsor. Thank you to the Black Trans Advocacy Conference for sponsoring today's video. The Black Trans Advocacy Conference, also known as BTAC, this year having its 10th anniversary conference, defining the decade, honoring the past, and advocating for the future. This takes place in Dallas, Texas from April 25th to April 30th. The National Black Trans Advocacy Conference and Awards Gala is a distinct educational and empowerment program event home to nearly 300 plus trans and gender nonconforming individuals, their family, friends, communities, allies, and corporate partners from across the country who are focused on advancing Black trans equality. Folks look toward this conference every year in part because the BTAC conference is a unique, life-changing 5-day program that furthers education and provides linkage to resources, community building, and organizing leadership development and celebration of diverse identities. It's host to over 500 workshops, seminars, CE courses, general session, open forum discussion, and guest speaker presentations, bringing together community educators and leaders to address the critical issues of access and parity in our society. This conference is open to the public to gather, educate, learn, build, and grow together in unity. Registration for BTAC is open now. I have the link in the description box if you want more information about this conference. If you are an ally or someone who cannot attend, you can also donate to the conference. That'll be great. Thank you to the National Black Trans Advocacy Conference for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back into abortion. If you're looking for a video specifically about whether or not you should be pro or anti-abortion, this is not that video. I didn't feel like doing that labor, but Khadijah and Bo did a really great video on that. I have that link below if you want to watch that. Very great resource if you want to learn about abortion, the history of abortion. Another video that I think is a really amazing resource that helped me understand all the legal stuff surrounding the overturn of Roe versus Wade was a video created by Wine and Chill. I really love that channel. She is a recovering lawyer. She does a lot of legal breakdowns that I enjoy, but she also has an amazing video that gives you more of the legal implications with Roe versus Wade being overturned, and also what led to Roe versus Wade being overturned. So it's a great resource. I have it linked below. Check that out. Educate yourself. It is really important to do that. I have been paying close attention to abortion rights and abortion restrictions for I would say the past 5 years now, more stringently in the past 5 years. But I never thought Roe versus Wade would be overturned. I don't think a lot of us thought it would be overturned. When I first was like, okay, it's about to go down, was when the trigger laws in certain states started to pop up. That's the first time I had a feeling that this can actually be overturned, because why would states have trigger laws if federally abortion is a right that all Americans have?
It is. So a trigger law is a law in place that triggers, that it goes into effect as soon as the U.S. Supreme Court makes its decision. So these laws were written before this decision to go into effect as soon as the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade.
So when trigger laws started to be put in place, I kind of got alarmed a little bit. A little more about me and my relationship with being pro-abortion is also me paying attention to a lot of reproductive work. I have experienced 2 abortions myself. I know many people who have had them, and it has been a great resource for them. I have raised funds to help people get abortions. I thought about being an abortion doula at one point. I even took a training to be an abortion clinic escort. I was really kind of like trying to figure out my activist space when it comes to abortion and abortion rights and the reproductive rights, specifically for Black people. I also grew up in a pretty pro-abortion home, not in a traditional sense. No one in my house was advocating for abortions in the way of which I do, but I knew that abortion was always something that I can access, even living in my Muslim home. I knew that that was something that was a resource that could be used had I had an unwanted pregnancy. I go deeper into that in a personal essay that I wrote on my Patreon, so I will have that link below, talking about my own experience with abortion, so on and so forth. Even with the trigger laws popping off, there was still a piece of me that just did not believe that Roe versus Wade would be overturned. It has existed my whole life. I do not know a world without abortion access. So when it was overturned, I was shocked. I was angry. I just couldn't believe it. I do have the privilege to live in a state where I wasn't affected by Roe versus Wade being overturned yet, because who knows? Yes, I live in New York, and people know it to be a very liberal place, but that's just New York City. Most of the state is red. It's New York City that keeps New York blue for the most part. So I understood the emotions. I understood the distrust. I've always had distrust with the U.S. government. I started to see people's distrust with the system set in place kind of fall apart. Saw that a lot online and fully understood why that existed online. It was a lot. It was a lot. But with that rage, a lot of conversation came out of it that was harmful to other marginalized folks. It's important that if you are in the space of dismantling marginalizations and getting rid of isms, that you should be wary of what you say, even in anger. So I want to address a lot of the things that was said during that time that I don't want to hear anymore. There is still current legislation and other things happening that are trying to restrict abortion access and reproductive justice just in general. This is still an ongoing thing and an ongoing fight, and there are going to be more times that we are upset. So I think the responsible thing to do was to kind of get ahead of that, discuss some of these things with you all, so that if you see some of this stuff happening in your community or in your online communities, that you can like nip it in the bud, because it's not productive to the goal, which is reproductive rights for all people. I enjoyed seeing people challenging each other to use inclusive language when discussing reproductive rights and also discussing the restrictions of abortion that was happening in this country. I thought it was great. But with that, another weird subset of conversation came out of that and really took over the whole conversation, and it made no sense.
On Sunday, in what appeared to be a reference to the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, Midler tweeted, "Women of the world, we are being stripped of our rights over our bodies, our lives, and even our name. They don't call us women anymore. They call us birthing people or menstruators, and even people with vaginas. Don't let them erase you. Every human on earth owes you."
Not only women get pregnant, trans men get pregnant, non-binary people get pregnant, and also not all women get pregnant. It was important to push the language that we use when discussing these things. And when everyone's eyes is on reproductive justice, it does make sense to push the needle and challenge people's language around who gives birth. I identify as a woman. And in that moment, I realized that I am not tied to that label in ways that other cis women are. And it may be because of the work that I began doing to dismantle my ideas about gender. The inclusive language like pregnant people, birthing people, people with vaginas. Can you say that on YouTube? I don't know. Those words didn't offend me. Those labels didn't offend me. I wasn't bothered by people trying to figure out the inclusive language. I prefer pregnant people because I think it is important to not reduce us to the functions that our body do and our body parts. So I prefer pregnant people. But even fumbling to get to what could be the language that we use, I thought it was okay. But for many, it wasn't. It made a lot of cis women uncomfortable. Cis women that I thought were also accepting of the trans experience. I do notice that anytime there is a group of privileged people and they see culture shifting, for some reason they feel they're losing something. So there are a lot of cis women who thought they was losing something. And the language of woman erasure popped into my Twitter feed and confused the hell out of me. I couldn't find the exact definition of woman erasure, but what I get from a lot of the articles that I found and the way that people are using it in this instance is that by using its inclusive language, by allowing trans women and other trans people into women's spaces, that we are erasing the existence of women, which is absurd because the only thing that can erase women and is actually doing a very consistent job of erasing women, especially Black women, is patriarchy. The other thing that was odd is that the conversation really started to center trans women when trans women are generally minding their business and not really trying to barge their way into reproductive justice conversations in the way that people think they are. There's literal anti-trans bills that they are paying way more attention to than what is happening here. When trans people are brought into the conversation, we're usually talking about trans men and trans non-binary people. But the conversation, when we're talking about including trans people in cis spaces, it's always about trans women. And that is just simply because of trans misogyny. Like, they're not even in this.
So now why am I in it? And you could have did it.
See, I get wrong and
you never apologized.
Y'all keep putting them in this. I don't get it. Using gender inclusive language does not erase womanhood. If you look at the amount of trans folks who are out, if you look at the numbers, it's very low. They literally cannot erase us. What woman erasure should be referring to and should actually be about, and what we should be actually addressing when we talk about woman erasure, referring to the systematic erasure or exclusion of women's experiences, voices, and perspectives from various spheres of life, including history, politics, media, and culture. For example, women have historically been underrepresented in political leadership. Women's achievements and contributions to anything just being overlooked. And if we talk about Black woman erasure, that That is something that is a lot more extreme, that is a lot more real, that has actual numbers to support the fact that Black woman erasure is real and is not due to trans and non-binary people. It is due to white supremacist patriarchal systems, not trans and non-binary people. Also, what happens when you say woman erasure is the erasure of women because of trans and non-binary people, you erase and fail to acknowledge that trans people, non-binary people are subject to erasure and marginalization themselves. How many trans people who are not out in history have done amazing things, but because they're and couldn't be out because they're not safe, we don't know the great contributions that they have contributed to society. Think about how we're literally trying to erase trans and non-binary people now with a lot of these LGBTQ laws that have been passed and will continue to be passed. That is actual erasure. That is legislation dead set on erasing a population. That's erasure. It is very disheartening to see Black women who experience erasure and know what that marginalization is as a Black woman, feed into this very wrong idea that trans and non-binary people are trying to erase women. There are real things that are erasing us, literally killing us, like intimate partner violence, dying in childbirth, poverty, and more. The trans existence won't ever erase us. Systemic oppression always will.
Women in the world have conducted sex strikes in history. In 2003, a sex strike helped to end Liberia's brutal civil war, and the woman who started it was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In 2009, Kenyan women enforced a sex ban until political infighting ceased. Within 1 week, there was a stable government. Okay, so we have more power than we think we have, and some of it could be right in the bedroom. Just saying.
A sex strike.
I don't know about y'all. I like doing the things with men. And I'm not going to stop doing the things with men because Roe versus Wade passed. Now, if that's your personal decision, you do you, boo-boo. But it is not required. It is not required. There's so much missing from that statement. And I understand arriving at that because of the stress and anger and just being frustrated. But realistically, like, this doesn't make sense. It almost reminds me of that argument that says poor people shouldn't have children. Those things don't quite correlate, right? When we make blanketed statements like women shouldn't have sex with men anymore, what you do also is kind of just release us to the function of a uterus or the function of sexual organs, when it's like sex is also about pleasure. It is not just about birthing. You're kind of aligning with the ideas that overturn Roe versus Wade because they believe sex is only for childbirth. Abstaining for sex from men does not do anything to protect my autonomy because my autonomy is still being controlled by the system. It's not just about birthing children. It is also about pleasure. Why should people stop having pleasure because of faulty government? It also erases the fact that men benefit from abortion, even men who are against abortion who benefit from it. And it's not only men who have pushed for Roe versus Wade to be overturned. There are women who advocated for this as well. The other thing that I'm hoping this wasn't on purpose. I'm gonna give y'all grace and say it wasn't on purpose, but not all people who get pregnant and need access to abortion have had consensual interactions. Abstaining and stopping having sex with men does not prevent that and may also make more harm happen because this is about controlling bodies. This is not about people having agency in deciding what they do to their own body. It is also patriarchal to withhold that for a certain outcome. Mary Harrington states, the old-fashioned patriarchal sexual mores which arose prior to the sexual revolution encouraged and often shamed women to withhold sexual access except in the context of long-term male commitment. The sexual revolution offered a technological fix in the form of birth control, promising to level the playing field so that women can play it just like men. Most women, regardless of where they stand on abortion, recognize that you can't have a liberal sexual culture for both men and women without a backstop in the case of accidental pregnancy. The overturning Roe versus Wade can and will affect the sex lives of everyone. She goes on to say, no woman should stop having sex with men just because abortion rights are being restricted. Sexual activity and reproductive rights are separate issues, and individuals should have the freedom to make their own decisions regarding their sexual and reproductive health. Restrictions on abortion rights can have serious implications for women's health and well-being, and it is important to advocate for policies that support access to safe and legal abortion services. However, abstinence is not a realistic or effective solution to this issue. You already have proof that abstinence isn't a good alternative even to stop young people from having sex, right? So why would that be an adequate solution or adequate rebuttal for the removal of Roe versus Wade? It doesn't make sense. Another argument that came out of it that really made me uncomfortable and also offended was realizing how much so many people in this country do not realize that everyone is not Christian. Everyone's not Christian here.
I want to talk about abortion. Yeah. I know it's a tough topic. I know if you listen to the media and television and the philosophies of the world, they're on one side of the coin. But my job as your pastor is to tell you what God's heart is about it. The world says abortion's great, fine. You can't tell a woman what to do with her body. No, a man can't, but God can.
And why I go into that is because everyone's screaming at the top of their lungs, what about the separation of church and state? What about the separation of church and state? And maybe for the Christian folks in this country, church and state has seemed very separate. But for someone like me, a Muslim person, and I'm sure people of other faiths or even atheists, it has not been a separation of church and state place. What is this idea of separation of church and state? Like, we say church instead of religion. Let me just get into what separation of church and state is supposed to be. The separation of church and state is a crucial principle in ensuring that the government remains neutral and does not show preference or discriminate against any particular religion or religious group. This allows individuals of all faiths or no faith at all to participate equally in public life and receive fair treatment under law. So that's what it's supposed to be basically, but the interpretation of that varies from person to person. It's supposed to be an essential piece of the American foundation, but it is not something that every American actually feels and experiences. Many religious minorities in the U.S. have experienced lots of discrimination. I have experienced it myself. Unequal treatment. A lot of the everyday things that we think are non-religious actually have very deep Christian implications in them that stand out for me because I'm not Christian, but don't stand out for other people because they are, or because they, even if you're not a practicing Christian, you do come from a line of Christian practicing people. So you don't see it. You think it's everyday things. But for someone like me, who was born and raised Muslim, it's starking for me. So when I saw a lot of that,
oh my God, they're impeding on the separation of church and state.
For me, it was just really laughable, and it just showed me how much people don't understand that there are so many people who are not Christian, and that separation has not existed here for us because we are not a majority. There is no chosen religion for this country, but it is implied that the U.S. is a Christian country because that is the majority of the faith of people that live here. A lot is geared to that. Sundays is a sacred day because of Christianity. That's not a sacred day for me. That's just Sunday, right? Can I get my Friday? That's the day for me. The privilege that I heard when people had this new realization that faith and legislation were two separate things was a bit uncomfortable for me because that's something that I've always known and that's something that I've always experienced. Different faiths also have different approaches and different ideas about abortion too that are being completely, disregarded or looked over. A lot of Roman Catholic and evangelical teachings say that life begins at conception. But that is not the case for other religious faiths. A traditional Jewish law known as halacha, I hope I say that right, please correct me in the comments if I did not pronounce that right, say life begins at birth, when a baby draws its first breath. Before then, the mother's physical and emotional well-being is most important, is paramount to that fetus, embryo, whatever. In some extreme cases, like if the mother's life is at stake, an abortion is not just permitted, it is required in Jewish law. There are Muslim teachings that also dictate the soul is breathed into a fetus 120 days after conception. So that's about 4 months. That's not considered a baby yet. There's also the Unitarians, the Oklavia Native American Church, and the Satanic Temple. The Satanic Temple is a global organization that is headquartered in Salem, Massachusetts. And that, despite his name, because I know the way you Christians are about Satan, despite his name, they don't actually worship the Prince of Darkness. That's not what they do. But they also consider body autonomy something extremely sacred. That body autonomy is important. It is a part of the religion for every individual to have body autonomy, which means that the state should not be making decisions for what people want to do with their body. Lastly, atheists exist. There are people who do not have a faith and damn sure don't want anything faith-based dictating what they do with their body. For many of these people, the separation of church and state that you felt exists never existed for us. So I'm going to close this video with just getting you to think outside of what you know and think outside of your own experience when talking about reproductive justice, because there are lots of different experiences and people who are affected by this legislation in many different ways. Legislation is still in progress to limit a lot of access to abortion.
The nation's second largest pharmacy chain, Walgreens, said today it will not dispense abortion pills in several states where the drug remains legal. The decision comes after nearly 24 Republican attorneys general wrote to the company threatening legal action.
Walgreens has decided to not sell abortion pills, not because of law, not because something dictated that they stop, but because the pressure of the right, the pressure of the anti-abortion people in government, they have decided not to sell that pill anymore. And that's just the beginning. There's going to be more. Let's make sure we are not pointing fingers at trans people, specifically trans women, who already have less body autonomy than us. Stop telling people not to have sex with men. That is not how we are going to get to a resolve. All you're doing in that instance is shaming women. And understand that this idea of separation of church and state has not and will not be a real experience for a lot of people in this country. Who we should be upset with, who we should be mad at, who we should be pointing fingers at is the motherfuckers in charge, not each other. Thank you for watching this video. If you made it to the end of the video, put a heart in a comment so I just know who got here. I like to do that every once in a while to see who has got to the end of this video. Thank you to my patrons. You make this thing keep going. Become a patron. Patrons get exclusive content and you also help me keep this thing going. The money helps me keep this going. I appreciate everyone who is a patron. You are a bad bitch. You are enough. Stay fly. I will see you in the next video. And watch this. Or I don't know where I'm going to put it, but watch that. You like this? Watch that.